Next, I'd like to talk about perfect pitch. It's a term you've probably heard before, and it's considered to be the ability to call a note out of thin air without hearing any reference note. So if I said, "Sing me a C," you'd be able to sing a C, and it would be in tune with standard pitch. Sort of like having a tuning fork permanently implanted in your head that you can turn on at will. When I was in college, I had a friend who could tell if our band tuned to each other or to a perfect tuning fork. She said that she had a constant tuning fork ringing in her ears and that it was a real annoyance at times. I thought of her as a kind of musical genius, so maybe you've had a friend like mine or heard similar stories. Anyway, I believe that perfect pitch can be developed, and I'm going to give you my theory on the subject. First of all, to develop perfect pitch, you need to have already mastered a thing called relative pitch, which is the ability to sing any note after being given a reference note as a starting point. So if I played middle C and asked you to sing a G, you could think of a pitch that's a fifth above C and sing it. La. If you succeeded, you could say that you had relative pitch. So relative pitch is what we've been working on all along in this program. It's the ability to hear the distance from one note to the other. Most all accomplished musicians have relative pitch, even if they never really thought about it. But perfect pitch is a trickier matter. It involves pitch memory, one step beyond relative pitch. So, can you remember exactly how high or low a note was? I believe you can. If I played a C for you on the piano, could you sing it right back to me? Yes. Could you sing it back to me if you waited 5 seconds? Probably. How about after 10 seconds? Maybe, but your memory might have drifted a little sharp or flat. So could you sing it back to me if you didn't hear it again till the next day? Probably not. By then, you would have forgotten and your memory wouldn't have a clue. So here's a few things that might take you in the direction of developing perfect pitch. Number one, what is the most familiar recording in your collection? Mine's A Day in the Life by the Beatles. When that record came out in the summer of '67, I must have listened to it 1,000,000 times. This recording ends on an E major chord, and the last chord lingers for a very long time. In fact, they kept turning the tape recorder up louder as the chord started to decay so that it would linger as long as possible. So that long continuous note was really well suited for me to develop my pitch memory. But anyway, whenever I close my eyes and think of that last note from A Day in a Life, the memory of that pitch comes back to me almost perfectly every time. Bom. Another thing that helped was the low E happened to be right at the bottom of my vocal range. So I kind of know if I sing the lowest note that I can, it'll be the low E, which is the 6th string of the guitar. I've talked to other friends who've told me similar stories about really keying in on other songs that just really stick in their minds. Okay, number two, if you close your eyes and picture your mother's face, you'll probably be able to see every detail vividly. Her eyes, nose, mouth, cheeks, chin, hair, just as well as if she was right in the room in front of you, even if you haven't seen her in some time. But if you think of someone you met last week, you might not be able to remember what they looked like at all, simply because you haven't seen them often enough to really get their appearance burned into your memory. So you can remember things you've seen, you can remember things you've heard, you can recognize your friend's voice on the phone when they call, and they don't even bother to tell you who it is. So why can't you memorize the highness or lowness of frequencies? Number three, Anything or any pitch that you hear on a regular basis, if you hear it often enough, you can remember it. If you walk into a room and declare that you're going to sing a G and someone checks you on their instrument, if you were right or close, that person is going to be a believer that you have the gift of perfect pitch. If you fail, you simply aren't familiar enough with that pitch to produce it from memory. Some people simply spend so much time with their instruments that there's always a note that stays fresh in their memory. Anyway, if you care to experiment for fun, you may discover that it was a valuable experience, and it'll probably help your overall ear training no matter how far you get with it. Okay, this concludes the program. Although it might not be real obvious on the surface, this program is practically an endless resource of musical exercises that you can tap into if you choose. There were 24 songs, 12 keys, and I don't know how many lessons. So if you exploited all of the possibilities, you would have 24 songs times 12 keys times whatever lessons, and that would total thousands. So use what's here or apply these exercises to your own favorites. Remember, the bottom line is to have fun. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I really hope it'll help all your musical involvements make a little more sense. You have 3 things under your belt now: ear, knowledge, and vocabulary. Your ear is familiar with scales, arpeggios, intervals, melodies, chords, and progressions. Your mind is full of formulas, patterns, rules, and structures, and your vocabulary is filled with terms and concepts that will allow you to speak and communicate your ideas and questions to people you play music with. So from this point on, it's time to take on projects, learn new songs, experiment with concepts, and get together with people. But it's going to be very different now. Now you know what to listen for, so you'll hear music in a completely different way. You now have the ear of a musician. Remember, feed a man a fish, you've fed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you've fed him for a lifetime. You haven't learned a single song in this program. Instead, you've learned all the songs that were ever written. The follow-up to this program is called How to Figure Out Licks Off of Records. So when you're ready to take your ear training to that next step, you might want to check it out. Good luck, thanks for tuning in, and in the immortal words of George Martin, all you need is ears.